Hey Mellow Cash Factories, how you doing? I don't care. Today we're going to talk about Unlimited Power, a sourcebook for mystics from Star Wars Force and Destiny. So I already did 3 reviews for each of the species, or not the talent trees. I did reviews on the talent trees, separate videos. Alchemist, Magus, and Prophet. Prophet, sort of a well-rounded talker. They have some buffing, some debuffing. Magus can heal, I wouldn't say it's a healer. Mostly they're a crafter with a whole new crafting rules that the book introduces. We'll talk about those in a minute. And mostly, they're sort of a blood mage. They hurt themselves to fuel the force power. So pick a force power. They're pretty flexible. Whatever your force power is, just kind of centered around whatever that is or those powers are. Alchemist is a healer and crafter. That's basically it. Check out the reviews and see my in-depth thoughts on them. Let's talk about the species, shall we? Species. Thespiacian, Tholothian, and the Verk. The Thespiacian, if you might know from the lore, they actually have extra limbs, like these vestigial tiny arms, but they don't actually do anything. They're just kind of useless and curled up, which is why they're hidden. It actually makes sense that their arms are hidden, unlike the Quirmian, who also had hidden arms, but I guess they were actually useful. That's why they had the bonus of the extra maneuvers. Anyway, they got extra arms, but they don't do anything. So if you knew about from the lore, they have extra arms. They must have they don't have the thing. What they do have is the fact that they're really mentally strong, and they have this meditation ability that offers them some extra bonuses in a couple areas that you don't typically get bonuses in. At least one of them anyway. And also they get some help with some strain. The Tholothian are near human. I'm surprised I was able to say that without f***ing it up. Tholothian. It sounds like I'm f***ing it up, Tholothian, but it's a real Star Wars word. It's a real fake word. They got these tentacles, and that's it. Near humans are basically like the Star Trek version of aliens. That's the Star Wars near humans. They just got a little thing that, like a really lazy thing, is put onto them, and they're aliens now. They're really adaptable, good at adapting with other people's culture. They get a unique ability that helps them... There it is. They get some help with social checks involving people of different cultures. Also, they do get some help in the wilderness in a particular area. I guess they're kind of outdoorsy. So there's that. The Verk are dinosaur men. They get some unique abilities, but I don't find them to be quite as interesting. Cold-blooded lizard men who are very charismatic, but also they do have a weakness, which is great, because they're cold-blooded. They're charismatic, but not in a terribly interesting way. They're fine. I just like the other two better, although the other two don't have weaknesses, which every species should have a weakness. For the signature abilities, we have Prophecy and Unmatched Destiny. So Prophecy, in a weird way, it's kind of like Rewrite the Scene, which is a thing that I hate in any and every game. Mutants and Masterminds had it. Star Wars has it. It's gone. Not allowed at my table. Even if I'm not GMing, I disallow it. But this version kind of works for me. So you see the future, some kind of prophecy, but it's not necessarily 100% clear. It's one of those things where, like, it could be misinterpreted. Burnham would come to Dunsinane type of a situation. Anyway, you make a prophecy as a player, or at least you can, and then at a certain point in the future that it can happen. But not necessarily exactly in the way that you want it to. Not that it's going to completely backfire, like a monkey's paw wish kind of a thing. See a prophecy that I'm going to come into a great amount of wealth, and that's because all of the other players die, and you get to keep the money they had and sell off their shit. Not that sort of thing, but you prophesy a thing to happen, and it happens, maybe not in the way you think. And we got... Unmatched Destiny is just dice pool manipulation for Force users. That's it. Like the, Technician's source book, what was it called? Unmatched Calibration. Unmatched Calibration and Unmatched Destiny, same basic stuff. One for Force users, one for not. Force powers, we got 2 of them. Conjure is a power. Green Lantern power, basically. You can summon this green shit, and then it becomes a thing. Either a weapon or tool. You can even have it be some kind of creature to fight for you. Actually, there's even a variation on that aspect to where you can use it to bring to life a corpse. So you can either just create a hard light creature of some kind, or you can just have this stuff go into a corpse and bring it to life. And it works slightly different. There are certain implications to doing one or the other. Bringing back stuff from the dead, as you might imagine, is a little dark side. Even though you're really more puppeteering it, bringing stuff from the life, or just playing with a corpse, essentially. That's what you're doing. You're using the Force to play with a corpse. That's probably some dark side stuff attached to that, as you might imagine. So what else? We could do some other stuff with it. You can make more than one, so presumably I don't see why not. Allies could have it. Like, you can have 3, so unless you're playing a species with 3 usable arms, it would make sense that allies could use the weapons or tools or whatever as well. We also have a few talents that will add additional weapon qualities onto them. And this is really best for a character who you don't really see as the physical type, but still could throw down because of their force ability. Palpatine, it was always weird to see him with the lightsaber in the 3rd movie. I know that it's not exactly the hottest of takes, but it just feels out of place. Like, he should be above that or beyond that or something. Anyway, him just making weapons out of thin air just because he's such an evil dick. I like that. If your character is that, well, this is the power for you. Next is Alter. With Alter, the idea is that you just basically have a stronger connection to nature and the environment around you, and primarily you can use it to shape it to your will. And you have some basic benefits to that. You can do a kind of cool, interesting thing with it. Not something that you typically see being able to do. I can't think of any other ability that allows you to do the thing you can do here. And this is one where GMs look and see what they can do, and make sure that encounters are incorporating this. This is something I don't do enough. It's something that you should have in encounters. Not just to give them something to do, but just in general. Any encounter should have a bit of this here and there, just to spice things up a bit. So you can physically shape terrain, but only certain types of terrain. You can expand the types of terrain you can affect. You can even expand it to where you're not just affecting the physical ground, but also the air itself. And you can have some effect on that, which will have interesting ramifications for the battle. We also have some abilities that deal with survival because you're connected to the plants and animals around you. You get some help with some survival-based stuff. Tap into the senses of animals around you, and that will help you get a better sense of your surroundings. You just have a connection with all living things, and the rock, the tree, the bird, all that good shit. There's an upgrade where basically, if you stay true to yourself, you can buff other people in a good way. That kind of, well, depends on your morality, how this actually works out for you and the morality of the people around you. But you can help with force powers in a way. So we have a couple different ways, like some utility ways of being useful, helping with survival. We got a combat buff, which is useful if you have a lot of force users. And you can manipulate the physical terrain and also the atmosphere to have quite a few interesting effects on the battle. I like Alter. There's a lot to work with here. And again, it mostly just manifests as telekinesis, as well as your ability to connect spiritually to the environment and the creatures and plants and animals around you. So it gives you a fair amount of different things to do, and also it feels like a very classic Jedi connection to the Force kind of thing. I dig it. In the equipment section, there's definitely an emphasis on weapons that are somehow connected to the Force, imbued with the Force. There's a Lucky Blaster. There's a Heartwood Blaster, which is basically use the Force to shoot better. Ashla Staff. The Ashla was the original word for light side back in the day in the ancient history of the Jedi, or their predecessors. And this is basically a magical implement from Genesis RPG, the generic version of this game. Or at least the Star Wars equivalent of a magical implement from Genesis. As you might expect, there's not a whole lot of high-tech stuff in this book. There's some spaceships and vehicles, but no attachments for them. In fact, no attachments whatsoever except just a few lightsaber attachments, of which there's not really that many. What I really want to talk about, the standout on the equipment section, are these things that give either permanent or temporary bonuses to your character by using them. So we have these Thespiasian puzzle rings. You solve the puzzle and that might help you in a way for a certain amount of time. There's a few things that can give you some amount of vision of the future, but more importantly, my favorites, the Dai Bendu Holocron and the Lausanne Chronicles of the Three. These two ways of advancing your character. Though I think the Dai Bendu Holocron is a little much. I wouldn't use it to its fullest extent unless it's a solo campaign. Even then, I wouldn't overdo it. I think there's a bit too much to it. It'll become clear once you read the Dai Bendu Holocron. You don't want one person hogging this thing. Spread it out a bit. Make them choose. You'll get it when you read it. Anyway, I actually like the Lausanne Chronicles of the Three better. They make a choice, kind of, and they get a little permanent benefit from the choice they make when dealing with this thing. Alchemy crafting, the new type of crafting which works a little differently than what you're used to. We still have the same template and then spending chart. We have that for potion as well as talismans, so consumable items and something that are kind of more permanent or might have more than one use. Sometimes the talismans are more than one use, sometimes not. Anyway, you imbue these items with the Force, but because you're doing it with the Force, you include your Force die, or more specifically, whenever a character attempts to craft an alchemical creation, they should roll Force die equal to their current Force rating. Should roll. Should roll. What kind of wording is that in a rule book? May roll, must roll, okay, GM decides that they can or not, but should roll, they should roll. Like if you want to, whatever, who gives a shit, I don't care, I'm just a rulebook. Next we do have some Mystic adventures and encounter ideas. They're fine, just some suggestions. A bit more wordy than they needed to be, but I don't know, I can't find that right blend of advice on adventures and shit. No wait, there was one thing recently, what was it? Oh, 50 Fathoms, that was it. That's my perfect setup for amount of information, the sweet spot for the amount of information on adventure data and whatnot. I typically don't like the way they do it in these books. Here it's a bit too bloated with words and doesn't have enough ideas, not enough bang for the buck. Like, I get it, okay, fine. Just narrow it down to a basic premise. That's all they really needed to do. Or have more stats, more checks. Here's a trap, do this check of this difficulty for this particular trap, and if they fail, then this happens. If they succeed, this happens. That kind of stuff I like. Not enough of that. Anyway, mostly just ideas and suggestions, stuff I'm not personally terribly interested in. They do, however, have a big section on, I want to say it's basically just like a patch, not necessarily a fix, but just an extra expansion on how to run Force powers, and to do so in such a way to where they feel more like how you would expect Force powers to feel. Like, for example, they have suggestions on what's basically their version of power stunting from Mutants and Masterminds, or I think Icons as well. They had this where basically they don't have access to a thing, an ability, but it makes sense that their character maybe could. So, in a pinch, they can kind of put some extra effort, strain themselves, not literally strain themselves in this game, but put a bit of extra effort and temporarily have access to a thing they normally wouldn't have access to. In this case, you could do a thing that really would be represented by a Force power that you don't have. The GM might allow you to do it, but it's quite a bit more difficult to pull off, but still, you could do it. I may have the Force power move, which allows me to move and lift and throw stuff around, rip objects out of people's hands, lift really heavy things, but I can't hold someone in place because that's in a separate power, the bind power. I can't do that unless I have that power, or you just do the optional rules here. You can do it, it's a lot more difficult, but it makes sense that you could do it, so you do. You can't use bind, but if you have another telekinetic type power, maybe you can in a pinch. But that's my own thing, the book doesn't suggest that. I was more just trying to get across the idea of it makes sense that a Force user could use a Force technique that they aren't learned in, they're experimenting with stuff. Anyway, we also have like Force duels where two characters are forcing each other until one of them gives up. Advice on a dark side. The dark side in general, playing a dark side character, dark side users in the party, concealing dark side use. There's also suggestions for making Force powers a bit more flexible in what they can do, though of course you have to be careful with that because Force powers are really powerful. It gives the Force user characters a bit of an edge. Although that's really more in a sense of having a wider variety of things they can do and not necessarily being more powerful overall. Certainly more interesting, but anyway. Okay, so unlimited power. Who should buy it? Well, if you are a GM, this may be in the running, possibly, for being sort of like the Fly Casual, the Smuggler source books for Edge of the Empire. This could be that for Force and Destiny. Emphasis on could be. It has a lot of tools, game mechanics, equipment, etc. dealing with the Force in general, as well as the dark side of the Force. I like the extra ideas on dealing with Force powers. I can't say for sure this is the best Force and Destiny supplement to get, but it's probably going to be up there. Keep coming back, and eventually I'll get around to the other career source books and other location source books, and I'll have a better idea of where this stands amongst all the others. But for now, it's pretty good. There's a lot to work with here. Though I think the person who is most likely to get the most out of this book will be a player who really wants to delve into the dark side, or play a character who's sort of on that edge, teetering back and forth. Between the talent trees, equipment, and crafting rules, there's a lot of tools here to help you steer your character down that path. But even if the whole evil, mad, cis scientist thing doesn't really work for your character, with the extra force power and the equipment, especially the holocron and the other thing, the teaching, the permanent bonuses and the stuff you can meditate on, add temporary bonuses. That's it for today. Do you like this channel? Do you want to see more of it? Do you like this shirt? Do you want to see more of it? Namely in the mirror when you wake up in the morning, or whatever else. Well then, you can visit my Teespring store and order some of my merch. It's, you got this and some other stuff. Buy it or not, whatever. It'll help. Alright, bye.